The silence in my house had become a living thing, a presence that followed me from room to room. It was a heavy, woolen silence, thick with the dust of memories and the echo of laughter that had long since faded. This particular December morning, it was broken only by the soft ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, a sound that seemed to measure out the seconds of my solitude rather than the time of day. I stood at the living room window, watching the frost etch delicate patterns on the glass, my breath fogging a small circle on the pane. 76 years old, and I felt every one of them in the ache of my bones and the hollow space where my heart used to be. The phone rang, a jarring, shrill sound that made me jump. It was a landline, an antique most people would laugh at, but it was the only phone I had. I let it ring 3 times, a habit born from a lifetime of not seeming too eager. When I picked up the receiver, the voice on the other end was unfamiliar for a moment. Then it clicked into place. It was my daughter. "Dad, it's me." Her voice was bright, artificially so, like sugar coating on something sour. "Elizabeth," I said, my own voice flat. I hadn't heard from her in 7 months, not since her birthday, when she'd called to thank me for the check I'd sent, the conversation lasting all of 90 seconds. "How are you?" she asked, and I could hear the effort it took to sound concerned. "I'm still here," I replied. It was the truth. I was always still here. There was a pause, filled with the static of the line. "Listen, Dad, we were thinking about Christmas." My grip tightened on the receiver. Last Christmas, I had sat in this same room alone. I'd cooked a small turkey breast for one, set a single place at the table, and listened to the silence. Later, I saw the photos on social media, a group shot of my 3 children and their families, all rosy-cheeked and smiling in ski gear, perched on a mountain somewhere in Colorado. The caption from my son, the middle one, had read, "Making our own traditions. #family first." The hashtag felt like a punch to the gut.
"What about Christmas?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. "We want to come to you this year," Elizabeth said, her words tumbling out in a rush. "All of us. We thought it would be nice to have a proper Christmas at your place, like we used to." Like we used to. The words were a ghost, a pale imitation of a time when my wife, Helen, was alive, and the house was filled with the scent of pine and baking and the sound of arguing and laughter. Now, the thought of them here felt like an invasion. Why? The question was out before I could stop it, a simple, blunt word. Elizabeth hesitated. "Because it's Christmas, Dad. We're family." Family. The word had lost its meaning over the years. It had become a transaction, a balance sheet. I was the asset they drew from when needed, and ignored when not. "All right," I said, after a long moment. "Come on Christmas Day."
The relief in her voice was palpable. "Great. We'll all be there. I'll coordinate with the boys. Don't worry about a thing, Dad. We'll bring the food, the presents, everything." I doubted that. I knew how this would go. They would arrive late, empty-handed, and I would be expected to provide the feast, the gifts, the backdrop for their holiday card photo. They would eat my food, drink my wine, and then leave early, their consciences solved for another year. But this year, I had a different plan. a plan that had been simmering in the quiet of my heart for 12 long months. After I hung up, I walked slowly to the mantelpiece. There, in a simple silver frame, was a photograph of Helen. She was smiling, her eyes crinkling at the corners, a light in them that had been extinguished too soon. Pancreatic cancer. It had taken her fast, and in its wake it had taken my children too. They'd grieved, of course, but their grief had been a private thing, something they shared with each other and their own families. I had been left on the outside, the widower father, a relic from a past life. "They're coming, Helen," I whispered to the photograph. My finger traced the cool glass over her face. "But this time, it's going to be different." The idea had come to me on that lonely Christmas morning a year ago. After I saw the ski trip photos, a cold clarity had settled over me. The pain was no longer a sharp, stabbing thing. It had hardened into something else, a resolve. I had spent my life providing for them. I worked 60-hour weeks as an accountant, crunching numbers so they could have the best schools, the fancy weddings, the down payments on houses. When Elizabeth's first business failed, I bailed her out. When my eldest son maxed out his credit cards, I paid them off. When the youngest needed a new car, I signed the loan. They were my safety net, their bank of last resort. And in return, I got silence, birthdays forgotten, Father's Days ignored, phone calls that only came when there was a problem that required a financial solution. The messages they'd sent me over the years, sometimes by mistake, were etched into my memory. Texts meant for each other, discussing me as if I were a problem to be managed. "Can you talk to Dad about the loan? He's always been soft on you." Or, "Do you think he'll update his will soon? The property alone is worth a fortune." The most painful one had come from Elizabeth, sent to a group chat with her brothers, but accidentally including me. "He's getting so frail. Probably won't last another winter. We should start thinking about what to do with the house and his collections."
I had saved every one of those messages. I had screenshotted them and stored them in a secure folder on my computer. At first, I did it out of a kind of masochistic impulse to punish myself with the evidence of their contempt. But over time, it became my ammunition. For the next year, I played my part perfectly. I was the grateful, slightly pathetic old man. When they called, rarely, I was cheerful. I never asked for anything. I never complained. I let them believe that I was content in my solitude, that I had accepted my place on the periphery of their lives. All the while, I was planning. I knew they would come back eventually. They always did when they needed something. This time, I would be ready. The days leading up to Christmas were a flurry of activity, but it was all mine. I told them not to worry about the food that I wanted to cook. It was a tradition, I said. In truth, I wanted control over every detail. I spent a small fortune on the finest ingredients, a massive prime rib, fresh oysters, imported cheeses, and a case of expensive Bordeaux. I decorated the house with care, dragging boxes of ornaments from the attic. Each bauble, each string of lights was a memory. Helen's favorite angel for the top of the tree, the handmade stockings for each of the children, now faded with age. I hung them all, a museum curator arranging an exhibit of a life that no longer existed. My neighbor, a kind woman named Barbara, noticed the activity. Her daughter, a young woman named Abigail, had been my saving grace over the past year. She was in her mid-20s, a vibrant, compassionate soul who had started bringing me groceries after she saw me struggling with the bags one day. It had evolved into weekly visits where we would chat about books, the weather, her dreams of becoming a teacher. She treated me like a person, not a burden. She asked about my thoughts, my past. She listened. In many ways, she had become the daughter I'd always wished for. The day before Christmas Eve, Abigail stopped by with a basket of homemade cookies. "Big plans, Henry?" she asked, nodding toward the decorated tree. "The family is coming," I said, unable to keep a hint of bitterness from my voice. She smiled, but it was sad. "That's nice. It'll be good for you to have company." "I've invited you too," I reminded her. "Come for dinner, around 6. I want you there." She had hesitated at first, not wanting to intrude on a family occasion, but I had insisted. I needed an ally. I needed a witness. On Christmas morning, I was up before dawn. I prepared the roast, seasoned it perfectly, and got it into the oven. I set the table with Helen's best china and silver, the patterns she had chosen with so much care 40 years ago. The house looked beautiful, warm, and inviting, a perfect stage. They arrived not as a unified family, but in staggered waves, each car pulling into the driveway with a crunch of gravel that announced another arrival. First came my eldest, Christopher, with his wife and 2 teenage kids who barely looked up from their phones. Then Elizabeth, alone. Her 3rd divorce was final last spring. Finally, my youngest, William, with his new girlfriend, a woman half his age who looked bored already. The greetings were awkward, hugs that were more like pats on the back, kisses that missed cheeks. They commented on the food, the decorations, but their eyes were everywhere but on me. They were assessing, I knew, calculating the value of the silver, the art on the walls, the antique furniture Helen and I had collected over a lifetime. The day proceeded with a strained cheerfulness. They opened the expensive gifts I had bought them, designer watches, jewelry, gift cards for lavish amounts. Their thanks were effusive but hollow. I watched them, my heart a cold stone in my chest. I played my part, smiling, nodding, refilling wine glasses. I was the gracious host, the doting grandfather, the patient father. But inside, I was counting down the moments. After the main course, when the plates were cleared and the room was filled with the warm glow of wine and full stomachs, I saw my moment. They were relaxed, complacent. Their guards were down. Christopher was telling a long, tedious story about a work project, and the others were feigning interest. I slowly pushed back my chair and stood up. The conversation trickled to a halt. All eyes turned to me. "I'm so glad you all could make it," I began, my voice steady, though my hands trembled slightly. I shoved them into my pockets. "It means a lot to have you here. It really does." I looked at each of their faces, Christopher's smug confidence, Elizabeth's nervous energy, William's detached amusement. I saw no love there, only obligation and perhaps a flicker of greed. "I have a gift for each of you too," I said, "something I've been working on for a while." I reached for the 3 manila envelopes I had placed on the sideboard earlier. They were thick, weighty with their contents. I walked around the table, handing one to each of my children. "What is it, Dad?" William asked, a smirk playing on his lips. Early inheritance paperwork? A few polite chuckles rippled around the table. His girlfriend giggled. "Open it," I said, returning to my seat at the head of the table. "And take your time." I watched as they tore open the envelopes. The rustle of paper was the only sound. Then, silence. A deep, profound silence that seemed to suck all the air out of the room. Christopher's face went pale. Elizabeth's hand flew to her mouth. William's smirk vanished, replaced by a look of sheer horror. Inside each envelope was a curated collection of printed screenshots, every careless, cruel text message they had ever sent about me. The messages where they discussed me as a burden, the ones where they speculated on my death, the plans for dividing my estate, the jokes about my loneliness, the accusations that I was a miser, even as they took my money. It was all there, in black and white, a testament to their betrayal. I let the silence hang, thick and heavy. I watched the color drain from their faces, watched the shame dawn in their eyes. This was the moment I had waited for, the revenge that was a year in the making. Then I spoke, my voice clear and cold in the quiet room. You didn't want a father. You wanted an ATM. Well, the machine is officially closed. The silence that followed my declaration was more profound than any I had ever experienced. It was a vacuum, sucking the false warmth from the room, leaving only the cold, hard truth in its place. I watched the faces of my children, Elizabeth, Christopher, and William, as they processed the contents of the envelopes. The color drained from Elizabeth's cheeks, leaving her foundation a stark mask against her pallor. Christopher's jaw tightened, his eyes darting from the papers to me, then to his siblings, a silent plea for coordination in this crisis. William, always the most transparent, looked as if he'd been physically struck, his hands trembling so violently that the papers rustled like dead leaves. I remained standing, my grip on the back of my chair, the only thing anchoring me. I had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in my mind, but the reality was far more potent. The air was thick with shame, and I breathed it in like a fine wine. Elizabeth was the first to break. "Dad, what is this?" Her voice was a thin whisper, strained with a panic she couldn't conceal. She held up one of the printed sheets, a screenshot of a text chain between her and Christopher. The message was clear. "If we play our cards right, we won't have to worry about retirement. The old man's house is practically ours." I said, "It's the truth, Elizabeth. It's every careless word you've ever said about me. Every time you thought you were talking to each other, but your thumb slipped and included me. Remember? The burden. The ATM. Probably dead soon." I quoted their own words back to them, each phrase a nail in the coffin of our relationship. Christopher slammed his hand on the table, making the fine china rattle. "This is a low blow, Dad. Taking things out of context. We were just venting. Everyone vents about their parents." "Venting?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Is that what you call it when you discuss the division of my estate while I'm still breathing? When you joke about how long I'll last? When the only time you call is to ask for money?" I looked at each of them in turn. "Tell me, Christopher, when was the last time you called just to ask how I was, not to ask for a loan to cover your gambling debts? Elizabeth, when did you last visit without a spreadsheet of your latest
can't-fail business venture. And William, you once told me you were too busy to come for my birthday, but I saw on that internet site that you were at a concert that same night." William flinched as if I'd slapped him. His new girlfriend, a young woman with wide, startled eyes, looked from him to me, seeing the man she was with in a new, unflattering light. "This is insane," Elizabeth muttered, shoving the papers back into the envelope as if they were contaminated. "You've been spying on us? Collecting this filth?" "I didn't have to spy. You sent it all to me. You just didn't mean to. I was simply the silent recipient, the ghost at your feast. Well, now the ghost is speaking." It was then that I caught movement from the corner of the room. Abigail, my neighbor's daughter, had been sitting quietly in an armchair near the fireplace, a witness to the entire spectacle. I had asked her to come precisely for this reason. I needed someone to see it, to validate that I wasn't the crazy old man they thought I was. She met my gaze, her expression a mixture of sadness and unwavering support. She gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod.
I turned back to my children. "You've had your Christmas dinner. You've eaten my food, drunk my wine, accepted my gifts. Now you have my final gift to you. The gift of clarity. You see, I finally see you for who you are. And you are forced to see yourselves." Christopher stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. "I'm not listening to this. This is senile bitterness. You've lost your mind." "Have I? Or have I just finally found my backbone? Your mother would be ashamed of you, ashamed of what you've become." The mention of Helen was a masterstroke, and I knew it. It was the one thing that could puncture their armor. For a moment, a flicker of genuine emotion, guilt perhaps, crossed Elizabeth's face, but it was quickly replaced by anger. "Don't you dare bring Mom into this!" she snapped, tears welling in her eyes. "You have no right!" "I have every right," I shot back, my own voice rising for the first time. "I was the one who held her hand when she took her last breath. I was the one who buried the love of my life. And I was the one you all abandoned when you decided I was no longer useful. Well, the usefulness is over. The bank is closed. Permanently." I walked over to the sideboard and picked up my glass of Bordeaux. I raised it high. "I'd like to propose a toast." My eyes swept over my stunned children and settled on Abigail. "To Abigail, a young woman who is not my blood, but who has shown me more kindness, compassion, and simple human decency in the past year than my own flesh and blood has in a decade. She brings me groceries. She asks about my day. She treats me like a person. To Abigail." Abigail stood up, her glass in hand. Her voice was clear and strong. She said, "To Henry," and she took a sip, her eyes never leaving mine. The message was unmistakable. The ultimate betrayal was complete. What followed was a chaotic, shame-filled exodus. There were muttered excuses, half-formed apologies that died on their lips, the frantic gathering of coats and purses. My grandchildren, who had been staring at their phones throughout the entire confrontation, looked up, confused by the sudden tension. Within minutes, the room was empty of them. The front door slammed shut, and the sound of cars starting and speeding away echoed in the night.
The silence they left behind was different from the one I knew. This silence was clean. It was a silence of resolution. Abigail helped me clear the table. We worked in companionable quiet for a while, the only sounds the clinking of plates and the running of water in the sink. "That was intense, Henry," she said finally, her tone gentle. "It was necessary," I replied, scrubbing a stubborn spot off a plate. "I've been carrying that weight for years. Now it's theirs to carry." She nodded. "I can't imagine how that felt, but you were incredibly brave." Brave? I hadn't thought of it that way. I had thought of it as desperate, as final. But perhaps she was right. After she left, promising to check on me the next day, I was alone again. But the house didn't feel empty. It felt peaceful. I poured myself another glass of wine and sat in my armchair, looking at the Christmas tree, its lights twinkling cheerfully, oblivious to the drama that had just unfolded. My mind drifted back, not to the painful recent years, but to the beginning, to Helen.
We met in the spring of 1965. I was a young accountant, earnest and poor, with holes in my shoes but big dreams in my heart. She was a secretary at the firm, with a laugh that could light up the grayest of offices. I courted her for a year, saving every penny to take her to a proper restaurant. When I finally proposed, it was on a blanket in the park, with a room I'd financed with a loan I spent 2 years paying off. She said yes before I'd even finished the question. We built this life together, brick by brick. This house was our castle. We scrimped and saved for the down payment. Every scratch on the floor, every mark on the wall held a memory. The faint water stain on the ceiling from when Christopher, as a boy, had overflowed the bathtub while pretending to be a submarine captain. The chip in the kitchen counter from where Elizabeth had tried to help me chop vegetables for a Thanksgiving dinner and nearly taken off her thumb. The worn patch on the stairs where William would slide down on his stomach, much to his mother's terror. We wanted children so badly. When Elizabeth was born, I thought my heart would burst with pride. I worked overtime, took on extra clients, all to give her the world. Christopher came 2 years later, and William 3 years after that. Our home was filled with noise and chaos and love. Helen was the sun around which we all orbited. She was the one who remembered every birthday, who soothed every scraped knee, who made Christmas magic happen year after year. When she got sick, the world stopped turning. The diagnosis was a death sentence delivered in a sterile doctor's office. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. We had 6 months. Those 6 months were both the shortest and longest of my life. I became her nurse, her caretaker, her rock. The children were adults by then, with their own lives. They visited, of course. They brought flowers, offered help. But the day-to-day grind of illness, the slow, cruel deterioration, was mostly mine to bear. I held her when she was too weak to stand. I fed her when she could no longer feed herself. I told her stories of our life together until she could no longer speak. The day she died, a part of me died with her. The light went out of the house, and it never came back on. In the immediate aftermath, the children were present. They helped with the funeral arrangements, sorted through her clothes, but then, slowly, they drifted away.
Their lives, they said, were busy, demanding jobs, young families. I understood, or I tried to. I didn't want to be a burden. But the loneliness was a physical ache. The phone that never rang, the empty chair at the table, the holidays that stretched before me, vast and silent. The requests for money started subtly. Elizabeth's catering business needed a quick injection of capital. Christopher had unexpected medical bills from a minor procedure. William needed a new car because his old one was on its last legs. I paid every time. I told myself I was helping my family, that it was what Helen would have wanted. But the messages started, the accidental texts. At first, I thought they were mistakes. Then, I realized they were a pattern. They had a group chat where they discussed me. I was never included, except by error. The first one I saved was from Elizabeth to the boys. "Dad's being difficult about the loan. Can one of you talk to him? He always liked you best." Then, a few months later, from Christopher, "Do we really have to go over there for Father's Day? It's so depressing. Maybe we can just send a card and call it good." Williams was the most cutting. "Yeah, well, he's not gonna live forever. We need to be smart about this. The house is paid off. That's a gold mine." Each message was a small death, a betrayal that chipped away at the foundation of who I was. I stopped being their father in their eyes and became an asset, a liability, a problem. The final straw was last Christmas. I had waited all day. I had cooked a full dinner, hoping against hope that just one of them would remember. The phone never rang. Later that night, feeling foolish and desperate, I logged on to that social media site my granddaughter had shown me, and there it was, the picture. All of them, together, smiling in the snow, #family first. That was the moment the pain crystallized into something else. That was the moment I decided on my revenge. I spent the year planning. I became an archivist of their neglect. I cataloged every missed call, every forgotten holiday, every cruel text. I practiced what I would say. I decided on the setting. Christmas dinner, the ultimate symbol of family hypocrisy. I invited Abigail not just as a witness, but as a living contrast to their behavior. She was the proof that kindness existed outside of blood ties. And now, it was done. I finished my wine and looked around the quiet living room. The tree lights glowed, the fire crackled. I felt a profound sense of peace. It was a quieter Christmas, yes, but it was honest. The ghosts had been exorcised. The machine was closed, and for the first time in a long time, I was free. The days following Christmas were unlike any I had known in a decade. The silence was no longer an enemy, it was a companion. It was the quiet of a battlefield after the war has been won. There was a stillness, a peace that settled over the house and over me. I slept deeply that first night, a dreamless, heavy sleep, and woke feeling lighter, as if I had shed a physical weight I'd been carrying for years. The first order of business was the cleanup. The remnants of the feast were still in the kitchen, the dining table still set with the ghostly remains of the confrontation. I worked methodically, without haste.
I wrapped the leftover prime rib and gave it to Barbara and Abigail later that day. I washed Helen's china with extra care, each plate a memory I now felt permitted to cherish without the bitter aftertaste of my children's betrayal. The house was returned to its ordered state, but it felt different. It felt like mine again, truly mine, for the first time since Helen's passing. I half expected the phone to ring. I anticipated angry calls, tearful recriminations, or perhaps even a lawyer's letter. But the phone remained silent. Their shame, it seemed, was stronger than their greed. Or perhaps, I thought with a grim satisfaction, they finally understood that the well had not just run dry, it had been cemented over.
Abigail visited on Boxing Day. She found me in the study, a room I had avoided for years because it held too many memories of helping the children with their homework, of balancing checkbooks to fund their lives. Now I was sorting through my own papers. "How are you holding up, Henry?" she asked, her concern genuine. I looked up from the desk. "I'm well, Abigail. Better than I have been in a long time." She nodded, understanding without needing further explanation. "They tried to talk to me, you know, as they were leaving." This piqued my interest. "Oh?" "Your daughter, Elizabeth. She grabbed my arm in the driveway. She was crying. She said, 'You have to understand, he's not well. He's twisted everything.'" I let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Of course, the first defense declared the accuser insane." "What did you say?" "I told her I'd been visiting you weekly for a year, and that in all that time you'd never said a cross word about them. You'd just been lonely. I said I'd seen the calendar with the birthdays circled and the phone that never rang. I think that shut her up more than anything you could have said."
A wave of gratitude washed over me. This young woman, with her innate decency, had been my most powerful witness. "Thank you, Abigail." "Don't mention it," she said, with a wave of her hand. The middle one, Christopher, he was muttering about elder abuse and undue influence. I think he meant me. "Let him mutter," I said, my voice firm. "The only abuse that has happened in this house was the emotional neglect they inflicted. And as for influence," I gestured to the papers on my desk, "I am of sound mind and body, and I am making sure of it." I showed her what I was working on. I had called my lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Irene who had handled Helen's estate. I was in the process of drafting a new will. The old one, written when the children were still in grade school, had left everything to them equally. It was a document born of love and hope. This new one was a document born of clarity. The bulk of my estate, the house, my investments, the life insurance, was to be divided between two beneficiaries. Half would go to establish a scholarship fund at the local community college in Helen's name for mature students returning to education. Helen had always regretted not finishing her degree. The other half would go to a local charity that provided support for lonely seniors, funding visiting programs and social events. To my children, I was leaving $1 each, a symbolic gesture that spoke volumes. Irene had advised me to include a no-contest clause, meaning that if any of them challenged the will, they would automatically forfeit even that dollar. It was a legal way of telling them to go to hell. "It's what she would have wanted," I said to Abigail, more to myself than to her. Helen's heart was always with the underdog, the forgotten.
She would be horrified by what our children became. Abigail placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. I think she'd be proud of you for standing up for yourself. As the weeks of January bled into a cold, gray February, a strange thing happened. I began to live again. The energy I had spent on waiting, on hoping, on grieving, was now free. I started taking walks again, something I hadn't done for pleasure since Helen died. I'd bundle up against the cold and walk through the neighborhood, nodding to other retirees, stopping to chat with Barbara about her garden plans for the spring. I even accepted an invitation to a weekly chess game at the local community center. My opponent was a man named Frank, a retired history teacher with a wicked sense of humor and a love for bad puns. We'd sit for hours, moving pieces in silence, then dissecting our mistakes with loud laughter. It was a simple pleasure, but it was companionship. It was connection. One afternoon in early March, as the first hints of green were appearing on the trees, I received a letter. It was addressed in a familiar, looping handwriting I hadn't seen in years. It was from Elizabeth. My first instinct was to throw it away unopened. But curiosity, and perhaps a final, stubborn flicker of something, made me slit the envelope with my letter opener. "Dad," it began, without a dear. "I don't even know how to write this. What you did at Christmas was cruel and humiliating. You deliberately set out to hurt us, and you succeeded. But I haven't been able to sleep since. I keep thinking about Mom. I keep thinking about what you said about her being ashamed. And the truth is, I think she would be. But not of us. Of you. For turning a family gathering into a spectacle. We are your children. We made mistakes. We got busy with our lives. But that doesn't mean we stopped loving you. The things we said in those texts, they were private, taken out of context. We were stressed, worried about you, about our own families. You have no idea the pressures we are under. We are willing to forgive you for what you did if you are willing to apologize. We can try to start over. But this silence is childish. We need to talk about the future, about your care. You're not getting any younger, and this behavior proves you might not be thinking clearly. Please call me. Your daughter, Elizabeth." I read the letter twice. The audacity of it took my breath away. There was no apology, only a justification, an accusation. She was blaming me for their behavior, for their neglect. She was even using my age and my Christmas confrontation as evidence of my diminishing capacity, a not-so-subtle threat that they might try to have me declared incompetent. The old Henry might have crumpled. He might have felt a pang of guilt, wondered if he'd been too harsh. But the new Henry felt only a cold, clear certainty. I took the letter to my desk. I didn't reach for the phone. Instead, I took out a piece of my own stationery and a pen. "Elizabeth," I wrote, "I received your letter. You speak of cruelty. The cruelty of my Christmas dinner pales in comparison to the cruelty of years of silence. The cruelty of planning your mother's funeral while you and your brothers argued over who would get her jewelry. The cruelty of seeing you all on a ski trip while I ate Christmas dinner alone. You say your words were taken out of context. There is no context in which a child discusses their parent's death as a financial opportunity that is acceptable. You speak of love. Love is not a word you use when you need a loan. Love is an action. It is showing up. It is calling. It is remembering. You and your brothers have not loved me for a very long time. You have merely tolerated me as a financial resource.
There will be no apology from me. The truth requires no apology. There will be no starting over. The trust is broken and it cannot be repaired. Do not contact me again about my care or my estate. My affairs are in order, and they are none of your business. You have made your choices, and I have made mine. Goodbye, Elizabeth. Henry.
I signed my name, not Dad. I sealed the envelope and walked to the mailbox immediately before I could second-guess myself. Dropping that letter into the slot felt like the final, decisive act of my liberation. I heard nothing more. Spring arrived in earnest, and with it a sense of renewal. I began gardening again, tending to the rose bushes Helen had loved so much. I had lunch with Frank. I helped Barbara plant her tomatoes. Abigail would stop by with books she thought I'd like, and we'd discuss them over tea. My life was small, perhaps, by the standards of my previous busy existence. But it was rich. It was authentic. The people in it were there because they wanted to be, not because of an accident of birth or the hope of financial gain. On a warm evening in June, I sat on the porch, watching the fireflies blink in the twilight. I thought about Helen. I didn't feel the sharp, debilitating grief anymore. Instead, I felt a warm, enduring love. I felt that she was with me in this peace I had fought so hard to win. The revenge I had planned had not been about hurting them. Not really. It had been about reclaiming myself. It was about refusing to die the lonely, forgotten man they had already written me off as. I had forced them to see me, one last time, not as a burden or a bank account, but as a man with a will and a voice. They had left in shame that Christmas night. And in doing so, they had given me back my life. The machine was closed, and I, Henry, was finally open for living. The legal challenge came in the fall, just as the leaves were turning. It arrived not as a heartfelt plea, but as a crisp, formal letter from a law firm I did not recognize. Sterling and Crow. The name alone felt like a provocation, a cold echo of the corporate world I'd left behind. The letter stated that, on behalf of my children, Elizabeth, Christopher, and William, they were filing a petition in probate court to have me declared mentally incompetent and to have a conservator appointed to manage my affairs. The grounds? Erratic and hostile behavior, evidenced by a premeditated and cruel public humiliation of family members, and a drastic, unexplained alteration of a long-standing estate plan. I read the letter sitting at my kitchen table, the morning sun streaming in. My hand was steady. Irene, my lawyer, had warned me this might happen. She had called it a preemptive strike, a common tactic when disinherited children see their inheritance slipping away. They weren't contesting the new will yet. They were trying to invalidate my ability to have made it in the first place. I felt a cold anger, but it was a focused anger. This was their move, the only move they had left. They couldn't appeal to my emotions anymore, so they were appealing to the state. I called Irene. Her response was typically blunt. "It's garbage, Henry. A fishing expedition. They're hoping you'll be intimidated, or that a court-appointed doctor will find some senility they can exploit. We'll fight it, and we'll win.
It'll cost them a fortune in legal fees, and it'll cost you nothing but time." I asked, "What do I need to do?" She said, "You need to see a psychiatrist of our choosing, a full independent evaluation. We'll get a report that states you are as sharp as a tack, and then we'll bury them." The evaluation was scheduled for the following week. The night before, I felt a nervousness I hadn't expected. What if I was losing my grip? What if the anger and the loneliness had clouded my judgment? What if, in my quest for revenge, I had indeed become the bitter old man they accused me of being?
The psychiatrist, Dr. Evans, was a woman in her 50s with a calm, intelligent gaze. Her office was warm and lined with books. She didn't ask me about my childhood or my dreams. Instead, she engaged me in conversation about current events, tested my memory with sequences of numbers, asked me to interpret proverbs. "What does it mean people who live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones?" she asked. I looked her straight in the eye. "It means that if you're vulnerable to criticism, you shouldn't criticize others. But in my case, doctor, I've already had every stone thrown at me. My house was shattered long ago. Now I'm just cleaning up the broken glass." She made a note, her expression unreadable. Then she asked about Christmas. I told her the whole story, from the lonely morning the year before to the envelopes handed out after dinner. I didn't embellish, I didn't rant. I stated the facts as I had lived them. When I finished, she set down her pen. "Mr. Delaney, do you believe your actions were driven by a desire to hurt your children?" I considered this carefully. "No," I said finally. "I believe they were driven by a desire to stop being hurt by them. There is a difference. It was about setting a boundary. It was about saying this far and no further. The hurt they felt was the natural consequence of seeing their own actions reflected back at them. I merely held up the mirror." 2 days later, Irene called, her voice triumphant. "The report is golden, Henry. Dr. Evans states you have exceptional cognitive function for your age, a clear understanding of the nature and extent of your property, and that your decision to alter your estate plan was a rational response to a perceived and well-documented pattern of estrangement. She even notes your metaphor about the glass house was apt and insightful. We're sending a copy to Sterling and Crow. I expect this will go away very quickly."
And it did. Within a week, we received a notice that the petition had been withdrawn. There was no apology, no explanation, just a quiet retreat. I later learned from a gossiping acquaintance that the legal fees had caused a significant rift between my children, with William blaming Elizabeth for the disastrous idea. The irony was perfect. Their attempt to seize control had only hastened their final fragmentation. Their silence now was permanent, and it was a gift. The next Christmas I did not spend alone. I spent it with my chosen family. Abigail and Barbara joined me, and I invited Frank and his wife. We had a simple, joyful meal. There was no fancy china, no prime rib. We ordered pizza and played board games. We laughed until our sides hurt. As I looked around the table at these people who had chosen to be with me, I felt a joy so profound it was almost painful. I had gone to war with my past and emerged victorious. The revenge I had so carefully planned was not the climax of my life. but the catalyst for its true beginning. I had learned that family isn't just about blood. It's about who shows up, who remembers, who cares. It's about the kindness of a neighbor's daughter, the camaraderie of a chess opponent, the quiet support of a no-nonsense lawyer. The best revenge wasn't the shocked silence at the dinner table. It was the laughter in my house a year later. It was the peace I found in my own company. It was a life lived well, on my own terms, surrounded by people who valued me for who I was, not for what I could give them. I had let them choke on their own guilt, served cold at the holiday table, and in doing so, I had finally warmed my own soul. Sometimes the greatest strength is found in letting go of the people who weigh you down. Justice doesn't always come from the outside. Sometimes you have to build it yourself, piece by piece, with quiet determination. What would you do if you were faced with a betrayal that cut so deep it changed your understanding of family? Would you have the courage to hold up the mirror?